What is going on, everybody? The time is here. The NBA season has arrived, and with it, the Daily Dime here at FTN Fantasy, our new show covering all things NBA, prop betting, prop pick'em, DK Pick 6, DraftKings and FanDuel DFS. Very excited to be getting this daily stream off the ground, and joining me to do so here on a Tuesday is the great Alex Blickle. Alex, I know we're going to talk a lot about the best player on your favorite team here in a moment, but how you feeling, man? Opening day is here.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about Tyrese Maxey. I can't wait.
Yep.
Yeah, Zach, I'm looking. You've got this perfect background. I just moved into a new apartment. I got nothing behind me. I had this perfect plan. It was going to be so quick, and then these shelves that I got. Yeah. Turns out you need a really official drill. So I've got everything ordered, but it's going to take a little bit. So eventually we're going to look a little bit more professional in this. But yeah, I can't wait for this season. This show is going to be so much fun just on a daily basis, whether it's just you, whether it's the two of us together. We're also going to have our boy Prop God on here a lot with us. And I mean, talk about a sharp betting mind. The guy just crushes these live bets on NFL. He's going to bring some of that to the NBA streets. So yeah, it's going to be a really, really fun season.
Yeah. I can't agree more. And yeah, man, the background, right? We work on it. We change things out. I just got the 50th anniversary Spurs bobblehead set completed. So I'm proud of that. You know, I'm a collectibles guy. I'm a memorabilia guy. So no Spurs on tonight's slate. So we'll have to talk about Victor Wembanyama on Thursday. There'll be plenty of that talk on the Daily Dime. But enough about my favorite team. Again, let's go to the Sixers, because just before we go live here, we get news coming across that Joel Embiid not only is out opening night, which for the Sixers is Wednesday, he will also be out for Friday's game. And this is the quote, quoting Underdog's NBA account. They said, he's responding well to his individualized plan and is expected to ramp up his return to play activities this week. And I already had my instant reaction in our FTN Fantasy Discord channel, where I'm in there going all caps screaming about why weren't we ramping up during the month-long preseason? To me, this guy is not currently injured. So did he just do nothing during the preseason? You're not injured now. It's not a back-to-back. Why aren't we playing here? And again, I have best ball shares, and I already had some entries in on Underdog, on Prize Picks, and I had Embiid unders, and now he's not playing. So all of my 6 picks go down to 5. I'm not bitter about it. What is going on here with your boy?
What makes me the most upset about this is that quote, that he's responding well to his individualized plan. No, he's not. If he was, he'd be playing, right? It's right. The individualized plan isn't let's have Embiid ready by Thanksgiving. And if it is, that's a stupid plan. So I don't know what's going on. You couldn't give me at least a week to feel good about the Sixers. Paul George is hurt already. I like I said in the Discord, I miss the Phillies. They broke my heart, and I already missed them. So this is rough.
Yeah, I know. And I know our buddy Preston in the chat earlier. I think he said he did one NBA best ball draft and he took Embiid in the first round. And so he said he's ready for WNBA to come back already. But I also see our buddy AJ in here. That's Shazam. So excited to see these two dimes daily. You're too kind, my friend. Well, let's go ahead and get into this, right? Because I'm sitting here and whining about prop picks that I had for tomorrow that are already ruined by Joel. But let's just right off the top here, right? We're going to talk about this slate. Kind of deep dive it here. We've only got 4 teams, 2 games to talk through here on opening night. But is there a play in DFS, a prop that you're looking at on whether it's on the sports betting side, the prop pick'em side with Underdog or Prize Picks, a site like that? Maybe DraftKings Pick 6, right? You and I were actually talking before this that I haven't even signed up yet for DraftKings Pick 6, and I think there's a pretty decent offer with our promo code over there too. So is that promo code FTN? Tell me about that. And then what's kind of the pick that's at the forefront of your mind right now?
Yeah, Pick 6 code FTN. The bonus right now is you bet $5, you get 50 free bucks. So that's a really nice way to start the season, right? So definitely get in on that. And Pick 6 is a lot of fun. I think one of the really cool things about it is that they're going to leave up some pretty favorable lines longer than some of the other sites. So for example, First one of the NBA season for me, Rui Hachimura, less than 0.5 steals. We have him projected at 0.26 steals. And you think, boy, that seems low. And this 77% win probability that the tool shows seems really high. Well, you should know he played 14 games this past April, 31.6 minutes per game in those 14. How many games do you think he had a steal?
At least 3.
Like,
I mean, it's got to be lower.
Right? Yeah, it's 1. He had a steal in 1 of those 14 games. The guy doesn't get steals. He played 5 games in the Denver series, again, averaging like 30 minutes per game, 0 steals. It's just not what he does. So, look, he had other months where he got a steal in, let's say, 40% of the games or something like that. We can't just look at April and assume that that's
right.
what his long-term expectation is going to be. But 77%, I think, is a really solid prediction here. And that makes it a really nice pick to just lock in and go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, looks like I've got a message here on the Twitter from an old buddy who's looking for the link to the Discord to join in, I guess, resubbed here at FTN Fantasy. So I'm going to deal with that here in a moment. Rui, that's an interesting pick. And that's a heck of a stat there from his April games, right? Almost 32 minutes a game, 1 game with a steal. I'm glad that was going to be the first point that I pushed back on, was like, well, that doesn't encapsulate his entire career. But I think it's a great way to illustrate how much this guy can be out there and how few steals he does rack up. You would think that simply being on the basketball court means like someone's going to make a pass and you're not going to know what happened. Oh, I just got a steal. Yeah. Nope, didn't happen. It's like he's actively afraid of the ball and just wants to go shoot his 18-foot jump shot, and that's it. I feel like I have a bunch of friends who always they'll be like, oh, if I got 30 minutes in an NBA game, I could go out there and average 2 points. And I'm always like, no, you couldn't. And but that's getting to the point where I feel like if I played 450-ish minutes, that a steal would fall into my hands. Mm-hmm. Maybe more than one game out of 14. Yeah. But
yeah, for example, a missed alley-oop that the guy can't reach, it bounces off the backboard right to somebody. You get credit with the steal. He's not even getting that in April. So, yeah, pretty funny.
So one that I had my eye on, I've got a lot of love for Karl-Anthony Towns, but that's not where I'm going to go here to start off. I'm going to go to Rudy Gobert and looking for the overs on his points prop, which I've seen most places set at 12.5. And a lot of the reasoning behind my love, and I think there's a lot of love around the industry for Karl-Anthony Towns in his new digs. And you do kind of get the pseudo replacement there with Julius Randle next to Gobert now. But Gobert, I think, should see slight upticks in his scoring, in his rebounding, slight upticks, right? I think there's greater, there's more room for all those numbers to go up for Towns. But Gobert can score, right? There are multiple seasons over 14.5, 15 points per game when he was back in Utah. And historically, if I can pull up the game log here. Historically, he does fairly well against Anthony Davis and the Lakers. If you look back at his last, I believe it's 10 games against the Lakers, he's over 12.5 points in 9 of them. So I feel like, again, this game, this is the nightcap, right? T-Wolves at Lakers, 221.5 implied total. The Wolves are 1-point road favorites here. So this game projected to move along at a fine pace, low 220s, close, expected to remain close throughout. National TV game. I think you're going to see a lot of Rudy Gobert out there. And so I've taken the over 12.5 a couple places, both on Prize Picks and Underdog. Rudy Gobert is not somebody that I'm a huge fan of, and I don't get on his props a ton, but I think we've got a little bit of room there to feel comfortable with an over selection. Do you have any thoughts on Rudy there? Because Rudy points, again, is not something that I frequently target, but it is standing out to me here early on.
Yeah, I actually like this too. I think one mistake that a lot of people might make is they think, oh man, Anthony Davis is such a good defender. Like, isn't that a terrible matchup for him? Rudy Gobert is not getting post-up possessions. He's not going one-on-one, right? What we're looking for with a matchup for him is what opportunity is there for him for lobs and for offensive rebounds. Those are the games where he's going to do well. And Anthony Davis is both a really aggressive shot blocker, but he's also really good at that. He's really good at just, affecting the shots in the lane, which means that guys are going to miss, and Anthony Davis is no longer there to box out Rudy Gobert. So Gobert gets that opportunity to either, flush home a lob because Anthony Davis committed a little bit early to the help, or to flush home a putback opportunity because Davis successfully helped and made the guy miss, but it's just hard to also then keep someone with Gobert's size and an offensive rebounding ability off the glass. So yeah, I like this one. I think it's both because of the new opportunity for him with Cat out of town, but also this matchup is just a lot better than you would think just because of how good Anthony Davis is.
Yeah, and again, 14 points per game last year, and in the 3 regular season matchups against the Lakers, 15, 13, and 18 points in those 3 games respectively. So looking to Gobert there. And I will, before we kind of jump back and maybe go through this on more of a kind of team by team breakdown. I talked a bit about this with Mike Randall on the FTN Fast Break podcast yesterday, which if you guys haven't tuned in yet, Mondays and Thursdays, about a 30-minute podcast recapping news of the week, previewing games, talking about trends, right? And I guess we could also talk a little bit more about the NBA charting effort that we're starting here this season at FTN and what we're excited about in that regard. But on Fast Break yesterday, we were talking about we've talked about futures bets throughout the preseason, but we gave a couple that we're eyeing here at the end of the preseason. And on DraftKings as of yesterday, you could get Rudy Gobert plus 105 to make first team all defense. He has been first team all defense in 7 of the last 8 years. There are no longer positional requirements for that award. So last year we saw Herb Jones and 4 centers on that team. Of course, Gobert was one. Gobert is the reigning defensive player of the year. And while I think his time, barring a Wembanyama injury, I think Gobert's time for defensive player of the year maybe has passed. I still feel pretty darn good as long as he's healthy that he will end up on that first team once again. And so plus 105, that feels pretty good for me if you're looking for a future bet here before the season gets underway tonight.
Yeah, I like that. For one thing I'll say too, you touched on it a little bit, but you're kind of selling yourself short since you're going to be leading this charting project. The data that we're going to have, it's not just that it's going to be like awesome as NBA fans, as basketball fans. It's also going to be incredibly valuable from a betting and DFS perspective. To have the kind of insights that we'll have on things like how defenses are defending the pick and roll and how certain offenses perform against those types of pick and roll defenses, like that's going to be amazing. The off-ball action stuff that we're charting, finding the outlier shooting performances from the Buddy Hield types, that it's often not just about whether they shoot well, but it's are they getting open shots all night? And does the defense, how willing is the defense to allow those shots to happen versus how much are they selling out to stop those shots and inviting guys to drive to the basket? It's going to be so incredible. And in a kind of world of NBA DFS now that it's so difficult to find that edge, this is our edge, right? Having something that nobody else has is as good as you can do.
Yeah, I think all of us very excited for that and to see what comes of it over the first few months here. Again, not all encompassing, but also producing some stuff around post defense, right? And I think that could be instructive, both again, right, from a real hoops perspective, just kind of cool to see. But then, like you said, hopefully giving us a significant edge, both for DFS and betting. Let's go ahead and here's Hugo, right? Good to see Hugo in here to start the season, saying we're talking shop for what? Let's get to it here. Let's go back to the first game of the night. Knicks at Celtics. It's ring night there in Boston. 222.5 implied total, right? So on DraftKings right now, just a point separating these games in terms of that implied total. But the Celtics, somewhat unsurprisingly, 6-point home favorites here. No Kristaps Porzingis, of course, in this one. No Porzingis until closer to Christmas time, from what I can tell. And let's start with the Knicks here. Let's start with the road team because this is the new look team. This is the hot team on everybody's mind, right? Especially between these two. The Celtics brought back essentially everybody from last year. And while that's great, and we'll talk about Boston, we've got Karl Anthony Towns in New York. Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle, obviously, in the second game tonight there with Minnesota. And I kind of teased Karl Anthony Towns earlier. So that's where I want to start here, Alex. And I can just go ahead and give the pick that I'm on in the prop market. 32.5 is the points plus rebounds line that I've seen multiple places for Towns. And I am confidently taking an over there as well. Because you've seen, of course, like we kind of expected it, and then it came to pass when Rudy Gobert showed up in Minnesota. Karl Anthony Towns goes from like a 26 in one season point per game scorer down to about 21 points per game. His rebounds also suffered, right? 2 years ago, 21 points, 8 boards. Last year, 22 points, 8 boards. This guy's 23 and 11 on his career, so I think that's a good indicator, right? It's not just Gobert. It's also the ascension of Anthony Edwards over the last couple seasons that contributed to that downtick in Towns' rates. And it's not like he's going to a team that has nobody else to take the usage, right? Jalen Brunson, one of the most usage-heavy guards in the league. But then you also look at what Towns has done in his limited preseason appearances, and he's smashing. And so I think, even again, in a tough matchup, Al Horford's down there. We know the switchability, the versatility of that Boston defense, but there is no Porzingis down there. And back with Coach Tom Thibodeau, I think we're going to continue to see pretty heavy minutes from these Knicks starters. So I am all over Towns in the DFS side today. On the prop side, and points plus rebounds is where I'm sitting right now in terms of my favorite prop bet. How you feeling about the big cat in New York here?
Yeah, I like this call, and we actually were speaking about this earlier. Like we went in and manually boosted his projections, and I think we're still a little bit low on him. So we might have to go boost him some more. Obviously, a lot of that is just because it's hard to find, what a guy's baseline rates are going to be when we've never seen him on this team before, things of that nature. But I really like the call, and I also have a pick that I really like that correlates super well with this. So Mikal Bridges, less 14.5 points. We have him projected at 14.56, which leads to a 53.5% chance of him going under this 14.5 number. But remember, that's with us underestimating Karl Anthony Towns. So the more we boost up Towns' usage and what Towns is doing, the worse it's going to get for Mikal Bridges. The other thing it doesn't account for is the fact that if you have watched any clips coming out of New York of Mikal Bridges' jump shot, I don't know what's going on
with that.
Markelle Fultz 2.0 is what it looks like to me. It is bad, really, really bad. So you take the usage kind of decrease coming now to New York, and you add in the fact that I don't think anybody wants to watch him take 3-point shots right now. I don't see how he gets to this number. So you get two things that correlate really well there with the Towns more and the Bridges less.
I like that a lot. From a DFS perspective, like Cat on both sites tonight, 7.8 on DK, 7.9 over there on FanDuel. I'm really high on him again on both sites. I think that price is probably discounted from where we're going to see his price settle over the first few weeks of the season. More of a decision point for me over there on FanDuel, where you've got Anthony Davis and Karl Anthony Towns, both center only, and both center only on DraftKings, but you can double centers up, of course, on DraftKings with the utility spot. So you do have to make that decision on FanDuel tonight. And, ownership obviously needs to play a factor, especially if you're single entering, right? You want to pay attention. You're going to have some of those tough decisions to make, but there's a pretty significant discount between the two, or from Towns down from Anthony Davis. 7.8 or 7.9 rather. Anthony Davis is 5 figures. He's over 10K. So it's Cat for me on FanDuel. But again, the ownership is there on both sites right now. 42% projected owned on DraftKings, 44 over there on FanDuel. But again, 2-game slate. So like 42% is not crazy on DraftKings.
Yeah, I think you're dead right about that. Going more into the DraftKings slate, I'll also say the GPP score for Josh Hart jumping off the page, clearly the highest on the slate. Derek White is second behind him. White obviously getting that kind of playing time and also usage boost with no Porzingis. So interesting there. But I'm curious how you think Cat's arrival is going to either help or hurt Josh Hart, because obviously so much of what he does is rebounding. Mm-hmm. And maybe Cat takes that a little bit, but I also just think like he's a phenomenal rebounder. He's just going to keep rebounding well. And it's not like Cat is this like phenomenal rebounder. So I think that as we boost Towns, I think it will affect Hart less than some of these other Knicks. And so I think he's going to remain one of the better projected players on the slate and probably the best GPP score.
Yeah, I'm not super concerned about the rebounding numbers for Josh Hart, because you got to think about, right, like even when Mitchell Robinson was out or limited last season, like Isaiah Hartenstein was in the mix, and he can hit the glass, probably just about as well as Karl Anthony Towns.
Arguably even better, honestly.
Yeah, and so the one thing I'll note on Josh Hart is I would not be surprised, especially coming off the recency bias of that Knicks playoff run and how beat up they were and how Josh Hart played like it felt like 16 straight games without coming out, right? So he was having these games where he's got, 12 points in 48 minutes, but he's got 8 assists and 16 boards, right? And he's just smashing his price. Like we were locking and loading Josh Hart at like 7.6K in the playoffs last year. And so to see him at 5,600 on this slate, with Dante DiVincenzo out of town, right? So he's solidly back in this starting group. I think the ownership could be a little bit higher than the 51% we have right now, and I wouldn't be surprised. That doesn't take me off Josh Hart, and I'm 20 max god over here, so I love the 20 maxes. I'm not gonna full fade Josh Hart. I wouldn't be surprised if I end up in that MME scenario being a little bit under the field, because I think, and this is not a super high probability pivot in my eyes, like this isn't somebody that I'm like, oh, I'm loading up on like 80% OG Anunoby. But positionally and price-wise, he's 5,300, so it's $300 cheaper. He's got the small and power forward eligibility just like Josh Hart. I think you can play both. You can get a ton of minutes out of those guys, and it's a 2-game slate. But if you're going to choose between one or the other, I think that for me in GPPs, I lean slightly towards OG, because I do think everybody is going to just jam Josh Hart into these lineups. And on both sites, he's 5,900 on FanDuel, where I think it's a little bit less necessary, but still an attractive price on FD as well.
Yeah, I almost wish that OG was less popular. Like we have him at 38%. If we do see something like in single entries, it's going to be 70% for Hart and 25% for OG. I think that becomes an easier decision. One thing I'll say there is a lot of these decisions, you don't have to just make the choice to play or fade Hart based on Hart himself, right? It can be, well, what other Knicks am I playing? Am I playing OG? More importantly, perhaps, am I playing Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns? I think that's how you end up making this decision. And along those lines, I should note, for those who aren't familiar yet with the GPP scores, essentially, we built them originally for PGA. They were so successful, we built them for MLB. They were so successful, we built them for NFL, and now, of course, we have them for NBA as well. And they tell us something really specific. A positive number tells us that the player is under-owned, and a negative number tells us the player is over-owned. Like that's as simple as it can get, right? And so the higher the GPP score, the more under-owned the guy is, the better a play he is. And above $8,000, the best GPP score is Jalen Brunson at 8,700. So I think you love Cat so much. I think Jalen Brunson is really sharp. If you're playing both of those guys, it makes it a lot easier to fade the super popular Josh Hart. So it just kind of depends on number one, like where is all this ownership going to move? Because I do agree with you. I think Hart could end up a lot higher than where we have him now. And suddenly it would become a more difficult decision.
Well, I know who goes in here saying McCall Bridges PRA juicy on Prize Picks and Underdog. And he says, is the loss of Dante DiVincenzo relatively offset evenly by McCall Bridges when it pertains to Josh Hart? My answer to the second question is in the noggin model, as it were, for me, yes. But I do want to point out that if you go into the Prize Picks prop tool here at FTN Fantasy and you just filter for this game, Josh Hart, more than 8 rebounds and more than 9 points are the model's 2 favorite picks on Prize Picks from this game. And if I'm choosing between those two, right, because we can't stack Josh Hart props on those sites, it's the rebound line for me. He's projected right around 9.8 right now on our last run.
Yeah, I like that. And I think my answer to this question is by the end of the season, I don't know if Bridges will start to take more than Dante, but I think to start the year, I don't expect Bridges to be shooting as often as Dante was. So I would almost say like it's less of a concern.
So let's see. P-Buck says, who's the CT fan? The brown stack of the NBA this year. I don't know yet. I don't get the CT pan reference, but if it's anything like the brown stack on the NFL shows, then I get the gist of it. Do you have an answer yet?
Who keep shining in the GPP scores as, this guy is not likely to do well, but man, if he does do well, he's going to help you like crazy. And they just keep failing us. Although I will, again, like the brown stack hasn't failed us the way people are complaining about it. So
yeah, sure. Yeah. And we did have a question here about Jericho Sims, right? We've got obviously Mitchell Robinson out kind of on that Porzingis timeline now, out until January. And then Precious Achiuwa, who you would think would probably pick up the backup minutes in front of Sims in this matchup. He's out tonight. So Jericho Sims, for me, is an option, especially on DraftKings, where he's got the power forward center eligibility. I think we've got him in for like 15 minutes right now in our projections, which feels about right to me. Again, it's just a way to get different. I am less than excited to ever click Jericho Sims into my DraftKings and FanDuel lineups. So for me, it's just a low-owned salary saving option tonight that I would not be surprised in my 20 lineups if I have no Jericho Sims and just full fade it and let the 13% of the field that we have projected right now to own him. If I lose to Jericho Sims tonight on opening night, I think I'm okay with that. But again, if I have some later on, if you're in that FTN Fantasy Discord channel, I'm going to be transparent with that. You'll know that I have some Jericho Sims after saying I might full fade him this morning. So do you have any takes on Sims there? Again, he's just not a good fantasy producer.
Yeah, I think the only way you're taking Sims is if you're fading Towns and you're essentially hoping for extra minutes due to foul trouble or something like that. I will point out the GPP scores like Jackson Hayes quite a bit as a value, one of the better values on the slate. And certainly an under-owned value. A difficulty there is Hayes is center only, whereas you can use Sims in the power forward spot. So that might be enough to sway me to the Sim side, but I think that's also one of the reasons why Hayes is going to be as low owned as he is. So that's going to be a bit of an interesting decision when you need some value.
Well, even on this team, and we can move on to the Celtics here because we're spending a lot of time on New York, but for $300 more, a different position, but you can get Deuce McBride, who is going to play, you would think, 20-plus minutes here tonight. Cameron Payne is going to play a role in this team too. And Tyler Kolek, the rookie, maybe, but you put a Nerf gun to my head right now and say, does Tyler Kolek play or not? At least outside of garbage time, and my answer would be no. So if I'm looking for salary savings on this Knicks team, I'm going to Deuce, or I'm going to go even to Cameron Payne, who is projected to be the lowest owned player on DraftKings from this Knicks side that we have in the rotation, sub 5%. I would rather go to Cameron Payne, the upside we know he does have as a fantasy asset, rather than pushing a bunch of chips on Jericho Sims.
Yeah.
I see Cat Guy in the Discord channel says that the top 8 GPP scores as of now fit into one lineup. So he says, do I just hit submit and go to Zillow and start browsing vacation homes? So that you could do that. But yeah, I mean, again, the pricing is tough today on in some positions, in some tiers, but you can make very strong lineups. I think tonight it's just going to be about what's that 1v1 or 2v2 that you can make off one piece or two pieces of chalk that can get you different into the top of the leaderboard.
Yeah, I also think just a warning, in the same way that we're going to probably boost Towns a little bit more, we might have to bring Julius Randle's rates down a touch, basically for the exact same reason, right? They just swap spots. So, he might become a little bit less. I've got a question for you, Zach.
Sure.
Do you have any conviction on what the New York rotation is going to look like? I ask because Towns' first quarter points is only 5.5.
Yeah.
And if we think he's going to play most of the first quarter and then sit like the first 4 to 6 minutes of the second quarter, that 5.5 would be pretty phenomenal.
Yeah. To be honest, I would want to go back and look at what, maybe not even what the center was getting for the Knicks last season in terms of their first quarter rotations, because Towns' role, minutes-wise, at least in usage-wise, is going to be much more akin to what Julius Randle would do for this team rather than Hartenstein or Mitch Robb. I would be shocked if we didn't get at least 8 minutes out of Towns here in this first quarter. And with how well he can shoot and score inside out, right? Even without looking at those rotations, historical rotations, and what Randle was doing before he got the shoulder injury, I believe it was last year. On the surface, that seems pretty appetizing to me as well. But there's probably also not a ton of Towns props you'll put in front of me today that I'm not going to like, because I just think he's going to play a bigger role than everybody has projected at this point. So
if I recall correctly, Brunson was actually not one of the guys that typically played like the whole first quarter. He was one of the guys who was taken out sooner. So if I had to guess, I would say Towns gets 10 to 12 first quarter minutes. And again, like that would make me think that his line should be 7.5, not just 6.5. So the 5.5 number could be phenomenal. You
probably don't see a ton of time where both of those guys are off the court. Not saying it won't happen, but I would imagine that Tibbs is going to want to stagger those guys. Because then, I mean, again, they've got capable ball handlers off the bench in Payne and Deuce McBride. They've got capable backups. They can go small and put OG Anunoby and Josh Hart kind of tag teaming the 4 and 5 position, especially against this Boston team, right, if they are a little bit smaller. But I want to talk about this Boston side because you've got a couple value pieces here that are low, single digit owned. You've got a value piece in Peyton Pritchard that's picking up a little bit more attention, especially on FanDuel, where he's just 4,100. The field, right around 30% there on FanDuel, 20% on DK, where he's 4,700. But then you've got, talking about Jericho Sims at 3,300. Luke Cornett is on the other side. There's no Kristaps Porzingis. I think I'd rather spend $600 and play Luke Cornett, who's got 9% projected ownership, and Jericho Sims right around 13. Sam Hauser, 4,400. I'm probably out on that. But before we talk about the starters, the mainstays, the more familiar names, how do you see some of this Celtics value? Because, again, I think this is where we're really going to be able to get different and potentially win one of these tournaments on DraftKings tonight, is the lower owned values who can pop in the right situation. What do you got on the Boston value?
Yeah, it's interesting looking at the Celtics team because the 3 top GPP scores are Derek White, Drew Holiday, and Al Horford, all guys who pretty clearly benefit from no Porzingis. And the thing that really intrigues me about this is that it kind of sets up for a lineup that doesn't deal with those difficult decisions of Jericho Sims versus Jackson Hayes, or you're not forcing in as many studs as you can get. Essentially what you're saying is the field is being forced into some values because of who they really want to play. And if who they really want to play doesn't really deliver on a big scale, then they're kind of getting hit even harder by the fact that they had to jam in some really bad cheap plays to help that. And so these really balanced lineups that, maybe they bottom out at like $5,100 or something can really, really get vaulted to the top. And so when I'm looking at these GPP scores, that's sort of what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a picture of a lineup that just, it almost builds as maximizing the weakest link instead of maximizing the highest ceiling guys that you can find. And I always like when the GPP scores point us in a very specific direction like that. It has been extremely helpful, I will say, in PGA. Like the number of times where the GPP scores made it clear that you want studs and duds or you want balanced, and that's exactly how it's played out, was just astronomical this season. So I really like the way this slate sets up in that regard, and Boston is at the forefront of it.
And going back to what Cat Guy said, right? If you can fit the top 8 GPP scores in there, it's probably a fairly balanced build that the motto is pointing us towards. And our buddy Shazam in the chat says he can vouch for the GPP scores regarding MLB. Paused for a bit, so he's a few minutes behind. But, quote, not likely to hit, but if they do, wow, they'll help you win, was the Oakland A's motto this year, he says. So I wasn't in those MLB DFS streets too much, but I did see you guys having success with those. And pointing out, right, to your point, to Cat Guy's point here, GPP scores, love Derek White, 6,300 on DraftKings here tonight. I would certainly prefer to go to Derek White over Drew Holiday. It's a $500 premium, but you do have point and shooting guard eligibility on White here tonight, and just 32% projected ownership in our last run. I think the model is in lockstep with how I'm thinking about this starting group, where Derek White is likely to be my highest owned guy from this Boston starting 5. But of course, we've got the Tatum and Brown conversation. You're going to have to spend up a little bit more if you want to get Tatum in your lineups. How are you looking at this starting 5? Because I think for me, I'm feeling a little bit reassured that the GPP scores are backing up what my thinking was building a placeholder last night, that Derek White is somebody that I'm looking to get into my lineups with that MPE.
Yeah, sorry, I was responding to a question there, but can you actually repeat that last part of the question?
Yeah, I was just saying, I think like when we're discussing this starting 5, right, you're always going to have the Tatum and Brown discussion, especially on a 2-game slate, right? And you're going to have to spend up a little bit more if you want to get Tatum in there over Brown. But we could sit here and debate how big of a chip are on each of those guys' shoulder based off their offseason, the Olympics, all of that. Jaylen Brown's on First Take yesterday yelling at Stephen A. Smith, but that GPP score is pointing us right in the direction of Derek White. And when I was messing around with placeholders last night, he's the guy that I kind of deemed in my head the guy that's my favorite option, at least on DraftKings from this Celtics 5. So what are your thoughts on the starting lineup? Because Al Horford, not for me tonight. The other 4 I'm going to have shares of, and Derek White's going to lead the way for me.
Yeah, I'm in pretty much complete agreement. I think one thing to note there is, like, we always love to talk about narratives and things like that, and they're fun, but man, you have to be really careful with them. And one thing here is, like, you can say Tatum and Brown are both super motivated and they want to come out and be aggressive. Well, they're still facing the Knicks, one of the best defensive teams, and one of the best teams at saying we're not going to let this guy beat us and actually meaning it and doing that. And so if you're playing either Tatum or Brown for the narrative, just know that the Knicks are also going to enjoy making them look bad on night one, and sometimes it's not about motivation. So I would very much caution people there. And to that end, if they are taking away Brown and Tatum, that is really good for Derek White and Al Horford and Drew Holiday. So kind of everything that we've been talking about already.
So OK was in here, and I think this is a good question to ask and answer as we kind of transition to the nightcap. Before we leave this game, if you're spending up on one, would you go Jaylen Brown or Jalen Brunson?
Brunson.
I'm there as well. Again, salary depending, right? If you've got a 2v2 decision, then that's something that head into that FTN Fantasy Discord channel, tag us with your 2v2 question, and we can give our feedback there. Or, okay, if you have it right now, fire that into the chat and we can talk about any 2v2s from a DFS perspective that you have. But and I know this is Preston's boy, Dalton Connect and the Los Angeles Lakers. I know he's excited, so let's talk Wolves and Lakers again. This Wolves 1-point road favorites here, headed out to LA. 221.5 implied total here. So we talked a lot already about, Karl-Anthony Towns being gone from Minnesota and what we think that can do for Rudy Gobert, especially with our interest on the prop side of things. When it comes to DFS, I'm less than enthused still. Again, on FanDuel, it's very tough for me to get to Rudy Gobert when he's just $100 less than Karl Anthony Towns. Yeah. But I imagine, right, as I can scroll over to our FanDuel ownership projections, that is keeping his FanDuel ownership somewhat muted. So if you're running an MME set over there on FanDuel, feel free to have some Gobert in. But again, even on DraftKings where we can slot in 2 centers, it's tough for me to prioritize Rudy here with Anthony Davis on the other side, his fantasy upside, what we already talked about with Karl Anthony Towns, my interest in Luke Cornett as somebody that I want to mix in as a value piece on DraftKings. And we've got Naz Reid, 4,900 power forward center eligible here. So let's start with the Minnesota front court. How are you approaching Naz, Gobert, and then the new arrival, Julius Randle, going to get the start here tonight?
Yeah, I feel like we have Edwards too low and Randle too high right now. So I think that's something we want to look into. Okay. I also feel like this is getting away from the front court a little bit, but DiVincenzo is the guy that I look to immediately here and I wonder about because he's got one of the better GPP scores already. And yet I also think we might be too low on him, 23.6. Now, maybe you can make an argument that, hey, it's a new team and guys aren't typically, super aggressive on a new team, but I feel like there's a lot of usage to be had. And one of the things that Minnesota could use is somebody who's not afraid to shoot a lot. And so if we do see some pretty big numbers from DiVincenzo out of the gate, I'm not going to be surprised at all. And it seems like people are pretty universally off of him even on this 2-game slate, we only have him projected for 23% ownership. And I kind of feel like he's more deserving of 40, something like that. So he might be one of my favorite plays.
Yeah, I think I agree with that as well. Julius Randle, the highest GPP score right now on this team, but Dante is right behind him. And I like it too. Like, I think I would, and maybe the ownership comes up if he did have guard forward eligibility here, right? He's point and shooting guard on this first slate. But to your point, I think there's going to be a lot of usage for him on that second unit, whether Randle or Ant are out there with him or not. Like, a lot has been made, and rightfully so. Like, Rob Dillingham is an exciting prospect. I do think he's going to play a role on this team this year, but not nearly enough for me to have interest tonight, especially at his price on DraftKings. And so Dante makes a lot of sense to me. It's only $500 more expensive than Dillingham, and I don't think this happens, Alex, but I think it's a non-zero chance that Rob Dillingham just DNP CDs tonight and does not see the floor because they've got Nickeil Alexander-Walker. They've got Dante DiVincenzo. Joe Ingles is here. He's going to get, at least to start the season, he's going to get his 10, 11, 12 minutes, right? He's going to go hobble around out there. He's going to scowl at some people. He's going to throw some bullet passes, and he's going to do his Joe Ingles thing. I just think, to your point, Dante DiVincenzo not picking up a ton of ownership for a 2-game slate, and the shots are there to be had. Jaden McDaniels is not a high-volume guy. They've already said they want less Mike Conley this season to try to keep him fresh and, again, just give a little bit more bite to this offense, especially when Ant has to leave the floor. So I like the Dante DiVincenzo call. He might be my second favorite guy from this team. It's between him, from a DFS perspective, it's between him and Naz Reid, who, again, is going to play a significant role off the bench. He's got the power forward eligibility, 4.9K. I believe that he's on that price on FanDuel as well. Picking up a little bit more interest than a guy like Dante, 42%. He's actually the highest projected owned player from this team. You have any hesitation on Naz Reid? Because I'm looking at that GPP score, and it is low.
Yeah, I do have a hesitation. I think it's completely related to Julius Randle. It's hard for me to figure out how they want to actually play that. And then the other thing is now, because of Dante DiVincenzo, I think they also have a little bit more capability to play small than they did last year, where we pretty much consistently saw 2 bigs on the floor for Minnesota. And we might not see that as much this season. So concerns for sure, but I think this is another one of those situations where you can make that decision based on how you feel about Gobert and Edwards and Julius Randle. And if you don't like any of those guys and you just think that Naz Reid is going to play a bigger part this season, then you can lean into that chalk and just get different elsewhere. But My lean is definitely not to Naz Reid, and I think there's probably some inverse correlation between Naz Reid and DiVincenzo. And because I like DiVincenzo so much, that kind of naturally makes me want to fade Naz.
Hugo in here saying it just feels like Randall is the fade and Dante is the flag plant for him. I think that's a perfectly fine way to approach this team, especially on DraftKings. Before we get to the Lakers, is there anything else you wanted to highlight here on the Minnesota side? Again, if you tuned in live and you missed it at the top, almost went to Karl Anthony Towns talking about props here. But Rudy Gobert, I'm a fan of the more than 12.5 points here tonight. A very good track record against the Lakers over his last 10 appearances against them. And with Karl Anthony Towns out of there, a guy that already averaged 14 points per game last season, over that number in all 3 of the meetings with the Lakers in the previous year. Gobert more than 12.5 points is something that I highlighted early that I just wanted to make sure anybody coming in late heard. Anything else for you on the Wolves?
Let's go to the prop world for a second. I noticed 2.5 rebounds for DiVincenzo is one of the favorite tools or one of the favorite picks in the tool, the more than 2.5 rebounds. I'm also pretty intrigued by more than 2.5 threes and more than 11.5 points. Do you have any strong takes on those?
I think the points would be where I came down because Dante, also a pretty good slasher, can score at the rim. He's athletic.
Yeah.
So I do agree with you that those Dante props look a little bit interesting. I would probably say points, then rebounds, then threes for me.
I think I like that. I like that call.
We got this in the chat here, 53% Miles McBride, good chalk. I think if you're looking for a cheap guy, he's the safest of those sub 4K options on DraftKings. I don't think that's really that close for me. Maybe we'll find something here on this Lakers side, but I don't think it's crazy. I don't know if I'm going as far as to say that it's good chalk, but it's not chalk that's making me turn the other way and run.
Yeah, I think this McBride number one, it might change. But number two, I think it perfectly encapsulates that argument I was making about like a really balanced lineup and what people are doing to fit in studs. 53% of people don't think Miles McBride is a great value. 53% of people think Miles McBride is good enough to help them get the studs that they want. And so like that just in and of itself kind of means that he's probably going to be overowned. Now, that means that there are lineups where he still makes sense, but in general, he's overowned. And so when you think about fading him, it just means you're probably not fading Miles McBride by pivoting to someone who projects terribly at equal price. You're probably pivoting to a different lineup construction overall, in which case it's just more balanced. And again, like I said earlier, you're strengthening your weakest link. And so that, as of right now, is kind of what I'm leaning towards.
So closing things out here with the Lakers. Again, 1 point home dogs here, of course. Bron, Anthony Davis up top. I'm very much on Anthony Davis over LeBron if you're just telling me to choose one, but there's positional constraints, of course, on both sites. GPP scores pointing you towards LeBron instead of Anthony Davis. So again, sometimes I will buck the GPP scores and I will go with my head. But how are you approaching the spend up options on the Lakers? Because especially if you're running more than one lineup, you're not ignoring these Lakers spend ups, right? At least one of them has to have a big game to keep this one competitive.
Yeah, it's one of those situations again where I think there are multiple decisions at play. First is LeBron versus AD. Now our projections actually like LeBron a little bit more, so that's an interesting one for me. I think that's probably related to the fact that, hey, at the end of the season in the playoffs, like his rates are higher because that's when he needs to do more. I don't necessarily think that's what's going to happen in night one. So we might want to change those rates around a little bit. But I also think it's a situation where you might just play neither. And if you're doing that, Austin Reeves and D'Angelo Russell are going to have to pick up the slack. And guess what? They both have pretty solid GPP scores. So if I'm going more balanced, I might end up, I would almost guarantee that I end up on either Reeves or D'Angelo. But I will say one other thing about Anthony Davis. Averaged 2.1 turnovers per game last year. And the way distributions for turnovers work is like whatever projected number it is, it means that it's skewing towards less than. So let's say he was projected right at 2.5 turnovers. We would still expect him to get fewer than 2.5, more than 50% of the time. So the fact that his average is so much below that line, we have him at 61.2% to go under this 2.5 turnover number. I like that everywhere. So that's another one of my favorite picks for the night.
Yeah, I like that pick. And just talking a little bit more about D'Lo and Austin Reeves, right? You're talking about the GPP scores. I think a significant boost for Austin Reeves over the rest of this team, right? With the 4.3 there in the GPP scores, slightly higher ownership, but he has the point and shooting guard eligibility. He's $200 cheaper. I would be with the motto here. I'm going to have slightly more Austin Reeves as things stand now than D'Angelo Russell, but I'm also with you in terms of the idea that having shares of both of those guys in an MME set is something that you need to do. And you don't have to play a ton to get over the field at those projected numbers tonight. Yeah. 30 for Reeves, 24 for D'Angelo Russell. I think Rui Hachimura on FanDuel is a pretty fantastic value at 4,200. Less necessary at 5K on DraftKings, where you've got those Knicks, you've got Dante DiVincenzo on the other side, you've got Naz Reid on the other side that are, comparable prices, guys that I would rather play on DraftKings. But over there on FanDuel, right, he is the highest projected on player from the Lakers. I think that's good chalk on FanDuel, given how close to the minimum he is and the minutes we expect him to play. But then we also got to talk about these value options, because Max Christie is going to play a role in this rotation, at least to start the year. Dalton Knecht, I think, is going to play a significant role throughout the season as a scorer off the bench. 3,900 guard forward eligible on DraftKings, 4,100 over there on FanDuel. I like him more on DraftKings, and I really like that 6.3% projected ownership. Alex, the rookie has the second highest GPP score on the team.
Yeah, he's such an interesting one, because we were talking about this with, I think we used Buddy Hield as the example last night when we were chatting. But Knecht really strikes me as somebody who, the more he's producing, the more he's making shots, the more playing time he's going to get from the get-go, which means his fantasy points per minute is positively correlated with his minutes outlook. And whenever that happens, the ceiling is a lot higher and the floor is a lot lower. So that type of player is the type of player that you want when they're contrarian, and the type of player that you want to run away from when they're chalk. Well, Knecht doesn't look like he's chalky. He looks like he's very contrarian. So yeah, I think he's a pretty solid value. And as of right now, he'd probably be the guy that I'm most likely to play under $4,000.
I just want to clarify for Hugo here. We spoke the name Max Christie. I'm not playing $4,500 Max Christie on DraftKings. $3,600 on FanDuel. You're running an MME build. Fine. Get you some Max Christie. Not excited about it. Just trying to talk through basically everybody that's going to be in a rotation tonight, because we've got such large main contests on both sites and just 2 games here. So I did want to mention.
He also really wants me to play this game, but I think we can compromise a little bit, and instead you and I can each just give a slate breaker, and that's something I'm going to do like every single night for NBA DFS. Obviously, I don't have a ton of time to play NBA DFS the way that I would like to every single night, but what we are going to do, what I am going to try to do, is put that slate breaker into Discord every single night. And so we don't have to be married to the slate breaker that we give right now. Obviously, it's still early in the day. Ownership, GPP scores, all that are going to change. But I definitely like the idea of just kind of pointing people to somebody who we think is going to be really underowned.
Yeah. And for me, I think if we're talking about ownership relative to my expectation or their potential outcome, for me, we just talked about him. It's Dalton Knecht for me. He was in my placeholder on DraftKings. The guard forward eligibility, again, maybe somebody like Dante DiVincenzo would be taking that role if he had guard forward, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, but point and shooting guard only for Dante. The the shooting guard small forward eligibility for Dalton Knecht. And maybe I'm letting some preseason bias seep in, right? This dude was dropping 35 points in preseason games just a week ago. And I know he's playing against better players tonight, but I think it speaks to how ready Knecht is. You know, we've known that since draft season. He's an older prospect, right? And that's part of the reason why everybody was so excited that the Lakers got their hands on him, because this is a guy that can come in and be a productive part of an NBA rotation from my point of view right off the rip. So connect for me in terms of the low owned guys. But if you're talking about kind of like the building block for me today of all the pricing tiers is Karl Anthony Towns.
I like it. One thing I'll point to, I'm sure that you saw this as well, but one thing that JJ Redick said after that Connect explosion down the stretch was that like his assistants wanted him to take him out of the game down the stretch, and JJ was like, no, I'm riding with this guy. And yes, it's preseason, but that at least tells me that JJ has a little bit of a belief in Connect's readiness, to your point, that's beyond what you would typically expect from an NBA head coach. And I also think JJ is going to be a very different head coach than most. And so he's probably one of those guys who's a little bit more willing to trust these youngsters from the get-go. So I like that a lot. JJ
is the one coach of the four tonight, right, that we don't really know what we're going to see 100%, right? Tibbs, everybody else, right? Joe Mazzulla, Finch, like we kind of know how these guys treat their teams. There's not a ton of change there outside of the Randall and Towns swap. So I agree. I see he sees the pens behind me. Yeah, so Philly-Pittsburgh connection. My dad's side of the family's from Pittsburgh, so you see there's Spurs, there's Steelers, there's Penguins, there's Rangers. I pick and choose. Yeah.
Yeah. My slate breaker, probably to no one's surprise, Dante DiVincenzo. And I love the uncertainty of being with a new team. And I think you can make the exact same case for Towns. So I like that call as well. But I just think like if one of these $5,000 players is going to drop 50 DraftKings points tonight, I think far and away, DiVincenzo is the most likely guy to do it. And he's not being owned anywhere close to that. So DiVincenzo's my slate breaker.
I like it. Let's see. Hugo said Zach was rooting for the Pens when he was a kid in San Antonio. That small collar blue Pennsylvania town. Never grew up in. I grew up in Austin. Hugo, you know this. Ant-Man or Tatum. I lean slightly Tatum there. But it's close. Do you have a lean on Anthony Edwards or Jason Tatum?
I think I actually lean Edwards, but it's really, really close.
Again, it's close.
Yeah.
Well, Alex, we are just at an hour here on our first edition of the Daily Dime. So again, we thought this one was going to run long. Just programming note for those of you tuned in live or watching on the replay. Typically, these are going to hover around 30 minutes. Sometimes we'll go longer when we have more stuff to discuss or when we're super excited for opening night as we were here today. But appreciate you guys all tuning in and sticking with us here. Alex, anything else for you before we shut it down here on a Tuesday?
Yeah, Brian said something in the chat earlier. It actually might have been the Discord chat, but he said, like, I hate NBA DFS, but I love FTN and I want to give this a try. And I think that sentiment is probably felt from a lot of people. And it's, number one, worth giving just traditional NBA DFS a try, particularly if you've been having success and really enjoying the GPP scores. They're going to translate to NBA DFS too. But what I would also say for people is we have this brand spanking new pick six tool. We have the existing price pick tool that you can use on Underdog. NBA is so much fun in these pick'em games, and you don't even necessarily need to have like extensive NBA knowledge or basketball knowledge. Just trust these tools. Trust what Zach and I are kind of telling you each day, and the picks we're giving out on these shows, and you're going to have a lot of fun doing that. And so promo code FTN Hoops for 20% off anyone out there watching who is not yet an FTN subscriber. Or if you are an FTN subscriber and you want to upgrade your plan, maybe you're a DFS subscriber and you want betting as well, so you're going to go VIP. Maybe you're an NFL-only subscriber and you want all sports. Any upgrades, you can still use the promo code, and all of your existing subscription, like, you'll be prorated so that you're not paying the full upgrade price. You're just paying the difference. So it's just an awesome time to join FTN.
And there's Brian, the testimonial from the man himself, says, I suck at NBA DFS, but FTN the last 2 years has made me the most money in DFS, going on 5 years now, and it's not even close. So I don't know, man. 2 years of you profiting, that is also probably you improving as well. So I don't know if I'd say you suck if you're making money, but glad to have you here, Brian. Appreciate everybody who tuned in. I'm back tomorrow with another edition of the Daily Dime. And of course, you can catch us in the FTN Fantasy Discord throughout the rest of the afternoon and throughout the slate. Appreciate you all tuning in. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.